In part 3 of our full Resident Evil recap, we discussed the events of Resident Evil 1, the second chronological game in the franchise. Here in part 4, we're going to move our focus to Resident Evil 2, specifically its 2018 remake, which finally brings us to the iconic Raccoon City, where things really start going wrong on a much larger scale than anything that has come before. Now, once again, a reminder that we did a complete recap of the series a few years ago, but this is a fresh edit with lots of it reworked, new things added, presented in 4K and 60 FPS. We'll also be covering Outbreak, Outbreak File Number 2, Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, and Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. Now, before we begin, this video is based on our understanding of Resident Evil 2's story and lore, and reflects our interpretation of its events as a refresher before Resident Evil Requiem. As always, we recommend that you make your own informed call by looking into the game yourself and ensuring that it matches your expectations, your standards, and personal values. So with that out of the way, let's begin. The destruction of Raccoon City. Raccoon City is where the ugly consequences of Umbrella's experiments with bioweapons and deadly viruses rears their head. But before we can get to that, it is important to go over some important events related specifically to the Umbrella scientist William Birkin, the creator of the G-Virus, whose hubris turns out to be the downfall of all of Raccoon City. After assassinating James Marcus along with Albert Wesker, stealing the Umbrella co-founder's work and taking all of the credit for it, Birkin, along with his wife, another scientist named Annette Birkin, was put in charge of an elaborate underground lab called Nest by Oswell Spencer. Located right underneath Raccoon City, Nest was the recipient of heavy investments by Umbrella, using which William Birkin and his team created and continued to work on the G-Virus. As time went on, however, Birkin realized that Umbrella wasn't going to allow him to grow within the company, and unsurprisingly, not long afterward, he made the decision to betray Umbrella. Birkin contacted the United States military and made a deal to sell them G-Virus for a large sum of money, which the military was all too happy to agree to, given the massive destructive potential of G-Virus as a bioweapon. Shortly before Resident Evil 2's events kick off, Umbrella gets to know of Birkin's plans and starts taking steps of its own. The company sends a USS squad led by an operative known as Hunk to Nest, with their mission being to bring Birkin in alive and confiscate all of his work on the G-Virus. In the struggle that follows, however, Birkin is shot and left for dead, and the USS squad leaves with samples of the G-Virus in a case which incidentally also had the T-Virus. Birkin, however, isn't dead yet. This is going to be something of a running theme here. And after the squad departs, he injects himself with G-Virus to give chase to the USS squad in the sewers. His wife steps in to shoot him, but decides not to. Birkin now hunts the squad and kills them all. However, in the tussle, one of the soldiers drops samples of the T-Virus. It shatters on the ground in the sewers beneath Raccoon City, only to then be consumed by rats, which, as you may have guessed, is how the T-Virus outbreak in the city begins. It must be noted that the 4th Survivor DLC makes it clear that Hunk survived the incident, escaped with the G-Virus sample, and handed it over to Umbrella's European side. Leon and Claire enter the scene. Now, this is where we shift focus to the events of Resident Evil 2 itself, 2 months after the events of Resident Evil 1, and to our new protagonists, Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie cop who is going in for his first day on the job at RPD, and Claire Redfield, who's traveled to Raccoon City to find her brother Chris, whom she hasn't heard from in a while. As RE2 kicks off, Leon's and Claire's paths quickly collide. They happen to run into each other at a gas station on the outskirts of Raccoon City, which they find is overrun by zombies. Overwhelmed and surrounded by the undead, the two quickly decide to help each other and jump into Leon's car and drive into the city proper, where things could not be worse. The T-Virus outbreak has resulted in a large portion of the city's population turning into zombies, while many others have become fodder for those who have freshly turned. In short, it is all chaos. Madness awaits. That chaos results in Leon and Claire promptly being separated from one another, following which the two decide to head to the RPD building, not only to meet back up with each other, but to get on with their individual missions. For Leon, that is reporting for duty and helping out in any way that he can. And for Claire, it's figuring out where Chris is. Upon reaching the police building, which in true Resident Evil fashion once used to be a museum before being repurposed as RPD's HQ, Leon and Claire realize that things are not much better here either. Though the RPD building had been a last refuge for the Raccoon City's survivors for a while, by the time our heroes get there, things have gone spectacularly wrong, once again. Almost everyone has died, their bodies and pools of blood everywhere, and of course there's no shortage of zombies either. The only source of help they find in the building is Marvin Branagh, a police officer who himself has sustained a zombie bite, which he eventually succumbs to after spending a good chunk of the game helping Leon and Claire find a way out of the maze-like RPD building. Mr. X is gonna get you. For Leon, our hero is now going to face some terrifying roadblocks, not only in the form of zombies, zombie dogs, and nightmarish creatures known as lickers, but also a tyrant, known to Resident Evil fans as Mr. X, sent by Umbrella to ensure that there are no survivors in Raccoon City who can spill the beans on the company's wrongdoings and its role in this outbreak. Not long after Leon's arrival at RPD, he meets Ben Bertolucci, an investigative journalist who's been locked up in a cell. He tells Leon that he's investigating allegations of corruption within the police department, but unluckily for him, this is where Mr. X enters the picture. Before he can reveal any actual details, Ben is murdered by the tyrant, who crashes through the wall of his cell and crushes his skull with its bare hands. From that point onward, Mr. X pursues Leon through RPD doggedly. We'll get back to his story in a bit, but for now, let's switch over to Claire. Sherry Birkin. Claire has also been roaming the halls of RPD and dealing with its many horrors in search of her brother Chris, and eventually she discovers information as to his whereabouts. Paperwork in the STARS office reveals that Chris left Raccoon City weeks ago, and that he is currently investigating Umbrella somewhere in Europe. That, of course, means that Claire's primary goal now is to find a way out of the RPD building and then escape Raccoon City. Not long afterward, however, Claire crosses paths with Sherry, a young, scared girl wearing a curious pendant who also happens to be the daughter of William and Annette Birkin. That, of course, isn't known to Claire, who quickly agrees to help Sherry look for her parents and make sure that she doesn't succumb to the many horrors of Raccoon City. Her first meeting with Sherry, however, also sees Claire being attacked by a hideous, mutated monstrosity that is unlike any other BOW that she or Leon have come across yet. That monstrosity is none other than William Birkin himself, infected by the G-Virus and going through several horrific evolutions. Claire manages to hold Birkin at bay, but only for now. But don't worry, he'll be back several times. That said, it's not long before Claire has to deal with an entirely different kind of monster. As she and Sherry are about to find a way out of RPD, they cross paths with Brian Irons, the chief of RPD, and unfortunately for our heroes, a serial killer and a deeply corrupt cop, to say the least. You see, Brian has been on Umbrella's payroll for years and has been using his position to cover up the company's work, even having helped with the construction of Nest right underneath Raccoon City. Oh, and by the way, he also killed Catherine Warren, the daughter of Raccoon City's mayor, Michael Warren. When the T-Virus outbreak engulfed Raccoon City, the mayor fled, and she was placed in custody of Irons, who intended to murder and preserve her corpse. Realizing his plan, she ran, but he ultimately killed her. And at this very moment, he has his eyes on Sherry. Irons attacks Claire, who is unable to stop him from grabbing Sherry and leaving. In the struggle, however, Sherry also happens to drop her pendant, which, as it turns out, is exactly what Irons was after. That pendant, you see, happens to be the key to Nest, the orphanage. Shortly afterward, Irons contacts Claire and tells her that if she wants to see Sherry alive, she will have to bring that pendant to him, and tells her to meet him at an orphanage not far from the RPD building. So Claire heads off. But before we talk about the orphanage and everything that happens there, let's go ahead and switch back to Leon. Because Leon too crosses paths with a rather interesting personality. After witnessing Ben's death, he meets Ada Wong, a woman who claims to be an FBI agent who is on the hunt for incriminating samples of the G-Virus as part of a government investigation into Umbrella. Leon agrees to help get her hands on G, a decision he makes after witnessing a gun shop owner named Robert Kendo having to put down his infected daughter before taking his own life. Together, Leon and Ada descend into the sewers of Raccoon City looking for a way into Nest. G-mutated creatures and monstrosities will block their path, including a massive mutated alligator among several other things. Well, this is also where they run into Annette Birkin. Unlike Leon, she knows what Ada's true motivations are, and more on that in just a bit. And in a desperate attempt to stop them in their tracks, she attacks them and shoots Leon. With Ada's help, however, Leon is able to recover and the two continue their journey, eventually finding a way into Nest. Meanwhile, Claire makes her way through the hellish streets of Raccoon City and reaches the orphanage, which has a dark and twisted backstory if there has ever been one. Founded and built by Umbrella, the orphanage has been little more than a front to quietly abduct children and use them as test subjects for the company's experiments. After Sherry injures Irons during a struggle, he turns the tables and begins to hunt her. However, their encounter is interrupted by the abrupt arrival of the G-virus-infected William Birkin. Not only does Birkin attack Irons, he also infects Sherry with the G-virus, believing that, like him, she will be a suitable host for G. Claire finds Sherry and squares off against Chief Irons, only to find him exploded. Knowing that the only way she can save Sherry is with a vaccine, Claire grabs the little girl and also heads to Nest. The revelations in the Nest. With both our protagonists and all major players now finding themselves in Nest, as you may imagine, this is where Resident Evil 2's story comes to a head. Leon gets hold of the G-virus, but he locks horns with Annette Birkin, who reveals Ada's true intentions. Annette tells Leon she's not an FBI agent at all, but rather a rogue mercenary who intends to sell G to the highest bidder. What isn't revealed here is that she was sent to Raccoon City to steal a G sample by none other than Albert Wesker himself, but we'll talk about that more later on down the road. Claire, meanwhile, is able to brave the horrors of Nest and retrieve a vaccine, which she is then able to save Sherry's life. There are, however, other hurdles to deal with, as you may have guessed. William Birkin arrives on the scene at this point, and by now he's been mutated by G beyond all recognition. And in the chaos that ensues, he kills Annette, while Nest's self-destruct sequence is also activated. With the lab falling to pieces, Ada, with a sample of G on her, falls into a gaping abyss, seemingly to her death. Leon, meanwhile, has one final encounter with Mr. X, who himself has mutated and transformed into an even stronger version of the Tyrant bioweapon, though with the help from an unseen person, and read Ada, who drops down a rocket launcher for him to use, Leon is able to finally take the monster down once and for all. Leon, Claire, and Sherry are able to escape the lab's destruction by boarding a train that speeds away through an underground tunnel, but not before one final encounter with William Birkin, yes, again, who has mutated further still. Thankfully, this fight ends with his death, and for real this time, following which Leon, Claire, and Sherry finally make it out of Raccoon City, bringing their night of terrors to an end. Both Leon and Claire are, however, now determined to put a stop to Umbrella's machinations. RE2's events directly set up Resident Evil Code Veronica, but before we get to that, we're going to need to spend some more time in Raccoon City, where there's still plenty to get to. So when we return in Part 5, we'll talk about the events of Resident Evil Outbreak, and then further parts cover Outbreak File Number 2, following which we'll be turning our attention to Resident Evil 3, or more specifically, its 2020 remake.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Vault, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.